Hello, welcome back. Hope everyone enjoyed their brief lunch. Uh, Again, apologize for this not being in person so that we could have served you a lunch, but I guess eating at the desk is something we've all become accustomed to during the times of COVID and Zoom. Uh, the film we just saw, Managed Retreat, uh, by Nathan Kensinger, is I just find it very powerful. It's you just hear animal sounds, no human sounds in that, and I guess it's the wildlife that comes back. Uh, where we've been pleased at Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center this year to have Nathan as our uh, guest fellow, research fellow for the year. He's worked on this conference with us, and you're also going to want to look at his white paper that he's written for this conference for the research center. It is on our website. You have links to it in the links that you received today from Ariel and from Jasmine. Excuse me. And Nathan is a journalist, a photographer, a filmmaker, a polymath. Um, his work explores hidden urban landscapes, forgotten waterways, environmental disasters, and coastal communities endangered by sea level rise and climate change. And so you see why he was the perfect match for us. For the past 15 years, he's documented New York City's changing waterfront in an ongoing series of photo essays, documentary films, video installations, and public arts projects. His work has been featured by all of New York's major publications and has been exhibited at the Museum of the City of New York, the Brooklyn Museum, the Queens Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Diasporan Arts, and the National Lighthouse Museum. I should also mention that there was a great display of his photography at the Atlantic Avenue subway station that probably ran for about 6 months pre-COVID. I was still taking the subways. And probably so many New Yorkers saw his work then as well. I also, every once in a while, he pops up on, I'm shaving in the morning and I hear him on WNYC, New York, where he's being interviewed on one article or another that he might have written for the Gothamist. And so it's my pleasure to present Nathan Kensinger, who is our speaker. And then he's going to also, after this, he will be the moderator and moderate our third panel. I think we've been set up for the afternoon now by Riz's presentation, which was so plain, so forthright, so harrowing. And now we're going to talk about those findings in many different ways. Okay, so welcome to the afternoon sessions. And don't forget at 3 o'clock, we'll have a kind of open forum and we'll see how that looks. Thank you. And Nathan, you're on.
Hey, can you hear me, Richard?
Yes.
Great, excellent. Just adjust my little camera. So yeah, hi, nice to have everyone here today. I wish we could all be meeting in person, but I'm so happy we've been able to have people come from all around the city to join us at this conference via Zoom. As Richard said, my name is Nathan Kensinger, and I am the 2021 to 2022 Research Fellow at the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center. I'm also a journalist and a filmmaker and a photographer. And I've been documenting the waterfront of New York City since 2003, where I've written hundreds of different photo essays for Curbed and Gothamist and Vox and WNYC and other publications. During that time, I've photographed and written about all of the city's recovery efforts since Hurricane Sandy. And I've also visited and written about all of the new climate change infrastructure projects that are being built throughout the city in the decade after Hurricane Sandy. As part of my fellowship, I've written a paper about sea level rise and Jamaica Bay. And the paper considers what the future will be for the Brooklyn neighborhoods on the bay. As Richard said, I encourage you all to check it out. It really covers a lot of the issues that we're discussing today and goes into depth on some of what the future might be for Jamaica Bay. So as a lead into our final panel of the day, I'm going to be talking about some of the projects happening in New York City right now to address sea level rise and discussing some of the things that appear in my paper. I'm going to share my screen now. Can everyone see my screen? Hopefully.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So I'll be talking about responses to sea level rise, what's being done and will it work and will it last? Just to recap some of what was said earlier at the conference today, all of New York City is really facing a tenuous future shaped by sea level rise and climate change. There's hundreds of neighborhoods along its coastline that will be impacted as storm surges grow larger and flooding becomes more frequent and severe. And tidal flooding will encroach far inland as sea levels rise. Major storms like Hurricane Sandy are also expected to become more frequent and devastating with sea level rise and climate change. This is a map of the neighborhoods of Jamaica Bay, just to give an overview of what we're talking about today. Jamaica Bay has a long history of storms and flooding, and the coming decades could be even worse than anything that's been experienced in the past. There's almost 3 million people living in the entire Jamaica Bay region, and there's dozens of neighborhoods on the waterfront of the bay, which are all at the front lines of climate change. There's more than 400,000 people living in the Brooklyn communities on the bay. These include Mill Basin and Bergen Beach and Canarsie and Starrett City and East New York. I know we've talked a lot about Canarsie today, but there's several other neighborhoods that are also going to be facing these problems of sea level rise. This is a map that looks at what would be underwater with the high-end projection of 9.5 feet of sea level rise. The New York City panel on climate change has predicted that the city is going to be seeing between 15 inches and 9.5 feet of sea level rise by the end of this century, by 2100, that is. The 9.5 feet of sea level rise is based on the very high-end projection of a rapid melting of the Antarctic ice sheets. But really, the amount of sea level rise we're going to see depends on how much emissions are cut around the world. But even just 15 inches of sea level rise on Jamaica Bay would be catastrophic. With 9.5 feet of sea level rise, many homes around the bay would be permanently flooded. Much of the Rockaway Peninsula and Broad Channel Island, Howard Beach, Bergen Beach, and Mill Basin would be underwater at normal high tides, along with large parts of Canarsie. And the ocean will have encroached deep into East New York, and the salt marshes around Jamaica Bay will have drowned, especially the salt marsh islands that we've heard about. But these are not abstract issues that are going to take place in 80 years or 100 years from now. The problems caused by sea level rise are already visible around Jamaica Bay, where coastal erosion and salt marsh degradation and tidal flooding are already common problems. This is a picture of Hamilton Beach, but in Hamilton Beach and Broad Channel Island, flooding during the monthly high tides has been a problem for decades and is only going to get worse. With sea level rise, this flooding could become a daily occurrence. It's predicted to become a daily occurrence by the 2050s in some neighborhoods on Jamaica Bay. So streets in the neighborhoods would be flooded like this every single day. As Hurricane Sandy showed, the area around Jamaica Bay and the Rockaways was really not prepared for a major storm surge. During Hurricane Sandy, the storm surge completely inundated the Rockaway Peninsula and Broad Channel Island and flooded neighborhoods along the northern side of the bay, damaging thousands of buildings and leaving behind hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. In Canarsie, there were more than 5,500 homes that reported damage from Hurricane Sandy, which is really, that's almost a third of the housing stock in Canarsie. So what can be done to prepare for the amount of sea level rise that we know is on the way and the storms that we also know are on the way? In the decade since Hurricane Sandy, a variety of short-term projects have been completed around the bay or are now underway. And these include wetlands restorations, street raising projects, and new storm surge barriers. The largest of these projects are located on the coast of the Rockaways, on the ocean side of the Rockaways. And in 2017, the city completed a $341 million restoration of the Rockaway Boardwalk here, replacing the wooden boardwalk, which was badly damaged during Hurricane Sandy, with a reinforced concrete barrier, which is intended to protect the neighborhoods in the Rockaways. Just taking a look at that new boardwalk in Rockaway Park, Queens. The new boardwalk is lined with retaining walls and baffle walls and sand dunes and other protective elements, which create a coastal defense system that's explicitly designed to resist the impacts of sea level rise and climate change. And the United States Army Corps of Engineers is now working to expand these protections on the Rockaway oceanfront with the $336 million project, the Rockaways Atlantic Shorefront Project, where they're constructing 14 new stone jetties and a reinforced dune system along the Rockaway waterfront. This is also meant to protect against sea level rise, coastal erosion, and storms. There's been a number of infrastructure projects, also smaller infrastructure projects that have been undertaken since Hurricane Sandy to protect homes and mitigate future flood risks. In 2020, the city completed a $46 million project that raised 3 of the streets in Broad Channel Island 2 feet higher and installed new storm sewers there. It's now working on an even larger $67 million project in Broad Channel Island to raise 4 more of the streets there that see this tidal flooding. And in 2021, the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery began working on the Fresh Creek Coastal Protection Project, which is a $14 million project that will help reduce flooding in Canarsie, which was mentioned earlier by one of the panelists, which will upgrade the storm sewer outfalls along Fresh Creek. There's been also quite a few marsh restoration projects that have taken place since Hurricane Sandy. Several different projects have already been completed or are now underway. The Army Corps of Engineers is working on a $109 million plan to restore 174 acres of habitat across 5 different salt marsh islands, and also on a $35 million restoration of 80 acres on Fresh Creek. Fresh Creek is in between Canarsie and Starrett City. These projects were authorized for construction in 2020, and they're actually now in the design phases. In May of 2021, the Wetlands Management Framework, which was mentioned earlier in the conference, was released by the city. And it highlighted several other projects that were a priority to fund around the bay. These included a $1 million restoration of Four Sparrow Marsh, a $12 million restoration on Fresh Creek, which would be in addition to the Army Corps' project, and a $6.4 million project for enhancing the marsh on Broad Channel Island. And in November of 2021, the National Park Service and the Jamaica Bay Rockaway Parks Conservancy completed the West Pond Restoration Project. This restored 2,400 feet of shoreline at the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge on Broad Channel Island. There's a $4 million project that created nearly 9 acres of new salt marsh, along with a living shoreline, as they called it, which had 200,000 new native plantings and an oyster shell breakwater system. The whole idea of that project was to really mitigate the impacts of sea level rise and storms and coastal erosion. But the biggest climate infrastructure project that's currently being considered for Jamaica Bay and really for all of New York City, is part of the Army Corps of Engineers New York and New Jersey Harbor and Tributaries Study, which is also known as HATS, like a hat you wear on your head. In October of 2021, the Army Corps restarted work on this study, and it expects to select a tentative plan this spring. The study evaluates 5 different proposals for creating massive storm surge gates at the mouths of waterways around the city. The biggest proposal is a $119 billion barrier, which would stretch from Breezy Point, which is seen in this picture here, to the Rockaways in Sandy Hook, New Jersey. But 3 of the proposals that are being studied by the Army Corps of Engineers include a plan to construct a storm surge barrier at the entrance to Jamaica Bay, which would stretch across the Rockaway Inlet from Floyd Bennett Field to Jacob Riis Park, as is illustrated here. This would be just to the east of the Marine Parkway Bridge. This barrier would be about 4,000 feet long, including its onshore connections, and it would cost more than $2.3 billion to complete and would take 9 years to fully construct. This project that I'm talking about, the HATS project, it's not intended to hold back sea level rise in Jamaica Bay. It's just intended to help mitigate the increased storm surges that could come as a result of higher sea levels and climate change. The proposals that include this barrier at the mouth of Jamaica Bay would also construct 22.3 miles of shoreline-based measures. These would include flood walls and levees and seawalls and elevated promenades. And in total, this system of barriers would stretch almost 24 miles from Gravesend, Brooklyn, out to Far Rockaway, Queens. The proposals that include this barrier, this 24-mile long barrier, and the barrier in the mouth of Jamaica Bay are estimated to cost between $17.6 billion and $25.6 billion. And New York City has already stated that they advocate for building a storm surge barrier across the mouth of the Rockaway Inlet and Jamaica Bay. So yeah, we're not really talking about like these projects are happening now. They're not projects that are being talked about for like 100 years from now. It might sound like they could be difficult to fund these projects, but there are actually several other projects happening around the city right now that I'll just briefly mention that are of comparable scope to what's being built, to what's being proposed for Jamaica Bay. And they help illustrate the enormity of the problems that the city is facing, and also the amount of money that is being invested, billions of dollars already being invested citywide to deal with climate change. This first project that we're looking at here is the Staten Island seawall, 5.3 mile long seawall that the Army Corps of Engineers is already underway on. They haven't yet broken ground, but they're beginning the preliminary work for this project. It's a $615 million project that will stretch along the coast of Staten Island. And like the Rockaway Boardwalk project, it would replace the existing boardwalk on the coast of Staten Island with a whole variety of berms and walls and levees. Just south of that, at the tip of Staten Island, the New York State Governor's Office of Storm Recovery is currently constructing a project called the Living Breakwaters. This is a $170 million project that broke ground in 2021. And it's constructing 8 enormous rocky berms in the Raritan Bay, which stretch across a mile of waterfront. The idea of these berms is that they'll help to blunt the impacts of storm surges and coastal erosion in neighborhoods that were really badly damaged during Hurricane Sandy. And the largest, or maybe just the most expensive project that the city is currently undertaking to address sea level rise, the Eastside Coastal Resiliency Project, otherwise known as the ESCR. This project broke ground already, I think a year ago. And it's a controversial project because it'll destroy all of East River Park. But basically, it's a $1.45 billion effort to construct a 2.4 mile long coastal barrier, system of coastal barriers along the East River waterfront, protecting neighborhoods in the Lower East Side and on the Lower East Coast of Manhattan. This project, just last year, they began demolishing East River Park, and it's well underway. A problem for all of these barriers and walls is that they are only intended to address a limited amount of sea level rise across a relatively short time frame. So the HATS proposal, the proposal for storm surge gates, is only intended to address an increase of 1.8 feet of sea level rise through 2100. And the Living Breakwaters is designed for just 18 inches of sea level rise and has a functional design lifespan of 50 years. And the ESCR, the project in East River Park here, is designed to address just 30 inches of sea level rise, which, according to the New York City Panel of Climate Change, could occur by 2050. So if sea levels rise by several feet, these enormous projects, which are costing billions of dollars already, would become largely ineffective. If sea levels rise by 6.25 feet or by 9.5 feet, the two high-end scenarios from the New York City Panel on Climate Change, there's really no amount of walls or berms or levees or storm surge barriers that would be enough to permanently protect all 520 miles of New York City's coastline. You just can't build 520 miles of walls that high in the air. I don't think it's possible. So dozens of low-lying neighborhoods, some of them just a few feet above sea level rise already, could be permanently inundated by the ocean. So when sea levels do rise up to this level where walls and levees are no longer a solution, what other choice might there be for local residents and for neighborhoods on the waterfront? This brings us to the idea of managed retreat. This is really one of the most interesting responses to climate change that I have seen emerge in New York City in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. For those who are not familiar with managed retreat, it's the strategic relocation of structures or the abandonment of land to manage natural hazard risk. And basically, it can involve demolishing entire neighborhoods that are endangered by sea level rise or climate change, or relocating groups of residents to new areas that are out of harm's way, or moving homes and roads and infrastructure away from flood-prone areas, or now, like in California, from fire-prone areas. Managed retreat is not a forced evacuation in the aftermath of a storm. It's not the seizure of private property. It's not the government coming in and saying, we're taking your house and we're going to build a storm surge barrier. Instead, it lays out a plan with local residents who are facing the future threats of climate change. And it's meant to facilitate a voluntary and more orderly relocation process in advance of what we know is coming our way. So New York City has already undertaken a managed retreat in 3 different neighborhoods along the coast of Staten Island. These neighborhoods are Oakwood Beach and Graham Beach and Ocean Breeze. And these 3 neighborhoods were really badly damaged during Hurricane Sandy. And in the aftermath of the storm, the local residents began talking with the New York State government about the possibility of relocating away from the waterfront. They had flooded many times in the past. They knew they were going to flood again, and they wanted to move away to somewhere safer. So in 2013, the New York State Governor's Office of Storm Recovery arranged a buyout program to help residents this is their official description, of withdraw from areas that are vulnerable to the impacts of extreme weather. And by 2017, which is the 5th anniversary of Hurricane Sandy, the New York State government had purchased 650 properties in Staten Island and also in Long Island in another retreat area. The agreement with the residents was that the land that the state purchased would never be built on again, but would instead be returned to nature as part of a wetlands buffer that would protect other communities inland. So hundreds of houses in these 3 neighborhoods in Staten Island have since been demolished, and a specially designed wetland seed mix has been planted on the empty lots. This is largely what Oakwood Beach looks like today in this photograph. As people may have seen the film earlier, I've been documenting this retreat process really since Hurricane Sandy happened. And actually, there's a unofficial managed retreat that's already taking place on the northern shoreline of Jamaica Bay. It was mentioned earlier in the conference as a coastal retreat. But basically, the city has been purchasing and demolishing homes that were damaged by Hurricane Sandy in a neighborhood, a smaller subset of Howard Beach that's known as Ramblersville. And the idea is that they would purchase the homes, they're demolishing the homes, and they're going to create a new wetlands area that's managed by the New York City Parks Department. That's essentially what a managed retreat is. The city is also organizing an unofficial managed retreat in Edgemere, which is a Queens neighborhood located on the Jamaica Bay side of the Rockaway Peninsula, where it's again utilizing buyouts and relocations with the express purpose of reducing the population density. So managed retreat is actually already here in the city. Managed retreat is taking place in multiple neighborhoods in the city, including on Jamaica Bay. It's taking a look at Canarsie here, where homes are built right to the edge of the water. If it was necessary, how would a retreat unfold in the Brooklyn neighborhoods on Jamaica Bay? Some of the communities here have similarities, at least in terms of the physical structures, to the homes that were demolished in Staten Island. And those include neighborhoods like Mill Basin and Bergen Beach and parts of Canarsie. But other parts of the Bay have much larger housing stock, including the apartment towers of Starrett City and the numerous New York City Housing Authority developments that are located in the Brooklyn neighborhoods on the Bay. How would these apartment towers be protected from sea level rise? If there's water in the streets, how will you protect 1,000 people living in an apartment tower? And if it was necessary, how would the city facilitate the relocation of thousands of residents in apartment towers in an equitable manner to move them to some other location? Managed retreat is already taking place in cities around the world. And it can be an effective and really permanent solution for moving people and buildings out of harm's way. But it's definitely not without its problems. According to a 2017 study on managed retreat, which was in Nature Climate Change, this is a quotation: managed retreat is often controversial because of the social and physiological difficulties in displacing people from their homes, which is the central reference point in the human existence. Managed retreat is certainly not a low regrets option, nor is it easily reversed. More problematically too, a recent analysis that was done of one of the major sources of funding for managed retreat in cities, the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, found that the program was inherently biased along racial lines, which both reflects and furthers historically discriminatory practices. So creating a just and equitable plan for relocating residents away from Jamaica Bay, should it be necessary, really, I think it would take many, many years of intense planning and community involvement. And time is definitely not on our side. Sea level rise is beginning to occur much more rapidly. And by the 2050s, we're going to see a significant amount of sea level rise in New York City. So with sea level rise expected to continue rising in New York City long past the end of the century, it's really not clear, at least to me, like what other long-term solutions there could be to protecting neighborhoods, to protecting people living along the Bay, and also to protecting the lives of the other species living around the Bay, besides an inevitable retreat from the waterfront. Seawalls and levees and storm surges all have a limited design life and would need to be continually upgraded and strengthened and replaced in perpetuity. You'd have to just keep building higher and higher walls as sea levels continue to rise. You can raise homes and elevate buildings, but really it's only realistic to do that to a certain degree. And it's only feasible to raise homes and elevate buildings if the streets and the infrastructure around the homes are protected from flooding. People realistically don't want to live above the water permanently and have to commute on boats nonstop. I don't think that's feasible for millions of residents in New York City. So what then will the future of New York City be as it faces the prospect of this sea level rise that is coming our way? and the prospect of more intense floods and storm surges. I'm going to end there and just leave that as an introduction to the panel this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to this afternoon's panel, which is going to consider this question. What are the strategies for 2080, 2090, 2100 and beyond?